you can ask all the questions you want. So we'll start out with the baptism of adults here. I want you to keep in mind the bigger picture, okay? The bigger picture being that this is God who has become man to reveal man to himself, to remedy the rift between God and man that was caused by our first parents. It's an expression of love. It's an expression of God entering time in creation. Baptism is the means by which we are brought in and to be united to him. So just kind of keep that in mind so that you don't get so disconnected that somehow you're just learning about baptism. Like, let's not forget what baptism does and what the whole purpose of this is. Just as I said before, Christ is no longer physically present with us. So what was once physically present with us in the person of Christ has now folded over into the mysteries and sacraments. This is our experience of him. All right, so let's just keep that in the back of our minds. Okay, in the early church, converts were baptized upon their conversion. Okay? In the early church, converts were baptized upon their conversion. So there was no formal process. Although they weren't just immediately, I accept Jesus, let's baptize him. Okay? There was still some sort of, learning that went on and formation, nothing formal. Okay? So we will admit and agree that there was development to the baptismal rites. So the way that we experience baptism in our parishes today, we're not making a claim that that's what the apostles did with the candle and the little white robe and all of that. But those signs and symbols represent something that was very deep and meaningful that they also agreed to. Okay? So since the time of the apostles, baptism has always been a journey and there's always been formation. We know this. It's always been a journey, and there's always been some sort of formation. Let's not pretend, that it was something that's automatic. This was entry into the body of Christ. It wasn't a matter of just getting somebody in. It was a matter of, are you accepting this? Okay. Let me just say it on the side. Some people might say, why baptize children? Maybe they can get older and choose for themselves, something like that. Think in terms of the country. You see how people fight to become citizens in this country and to have their children born in this country. Why would they do that? Because of how deeply they believe in whatever, how well we think we're doing this experiment of democracy in the United States. So what do people want? They want their children to have the same privileges that they do, and they want their children to be brought up into the same country that they hold dear. It's the same thing with your faith, okay? This is why we baptize infants. We're trying to give to them the same opportunities, the same privileges, and being brought into the faith that we hold dear, okay? So just keep that in the back of your mind. Does anybody know what RCIA stands for? Very good. The Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. And by rite, it's R-I-T-E. Okay, not like correct, R-I-G-H-T. The Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. And you should know, even though it's not up here on the board, that rite is the form of the service, okay? It's the form of the service or the worship. So you already have gotten a quick glimpse yesterday about the formal cause. Like, if we talk about the material cause of a pencil, right? It's wood, it's graphite, it's a metal ferrule, it's rubber. But the form that it takes, its arrangement, that's its form, okay? So whatever the material aspects of baptism, the form that it takes, we would call this a rite, okay? So we have a rite to bring people, adults this is, into the Christian faith. Now, what I'll do is there's the name of each stage. I'll tell you what it's prior to, okay? Kind of like, Advent's prior to Christmas, that type of, scenario. And then on the right, you see what pretty much entails that period. So I'll just go through them, and then I'll say something more generally about them. First of all, a pre-catechumenate. I know that's a mouthful for a word. This is prior to the rite of acceptance, okay? The pre-catechumenate is prior to the rite of acceptance. So this is a stage of inquiry. In other words, there's no commitments. I'm wondering if this is something for me. Am I being called to be a Christian and come into the Catholic faith? So up until the time that your name is literally put into a book and sent to the bishop, you're known as a pre-catechumenate, and it's just a period of inquiry. After that rite of acceptance, you are now known as a catechumenate. And you will now be a catechumenate all the way up to Lent, upon which that's prior to the rite of sending, okay? Where your name will literally be put into a book, and that book will be handed to the bishop. In other words, you're getting close. And that whole period is a period of instruction and learning. It includes having books to read. It includes getting tours of the church. It includes having a mentor couple or at least an advocate that will go along to all the meetings with you, which is once a week, and answer any little hairy questions you have. Like, I don't know what's going to happen once this does, or what do I do this? And this is all has to be freely chosen, okay? The Catholic Church wants to evangelize as many people as possible, but you don't win by numbers, okay? If we would win by numbers, we'd already would have won. I don't know if you're aware, but there are more Catholics in the world than every other Christian denomination combined. Add them all up, and there's more Catholics. So this is not about who has the most numbers. This isn't a cult that we're trying to trick people to get into. We want you to freely accept and understand what it is that we teach so that you can be full members of this faith community. That's what you're learning during this catechumenate stage. That's prior to the rite of sending. Then, at that point, during the period of Lent, you're known as the elect. And Lent, again, is a season that was always set aside for this. This is why we go through Lent. In other words, we can walk through Lent with these individuals. And that is prior to baptism. Okay? You are an elect up until the point of baptism, which is on Easter Vigil. We're kind of done with instructions and teaching for the moment. At this point, it's all purification and enlightenment. And they are actually asked to be scrutinized. Scrutinize yourself. They'll go on retreats at this point. There'll be more spiritual opportunities for them. Do you really want to do this? All right? So you leave anytime up to this point, no harm, no foul. Okay? It's the same way with, like, think of it in terms of an engagement. It's not quite the same, but when I was teaching the marriage class the other night, I told them, if you're not called to marriage, get out now. It'll be the hardest thing you ever do, and if it's not hard, you're not doing it well. But it'll be the hardest thing you ever do, and it's a commitment until you are dead. So if you are not truly being called to this, even though it might break hearts and you lose some deposit money, that's much better than ruining your life, somebody else's life, and raising children in a miserable marriage. All right? So at this point, people don't typically leave. They're committed at this point, just like people don't typically break engagements. But still, at this point, no harm, no foul. It's not for you. After you are baptized, you are now a Christian and a Catholic. You enter the stage called mystagogy. It just follows baptism, okay? In other words, we're not done with you yet. Now we're going to try to get you a little deeper into the mysteries of the faith, help you understand more fully what we believe. People that go through this process, they usually have a good zeal for the faith. And for those of you that were born and raised Catholic, the so-called cradle Catholics, I am telling you from my experience of working with people in RCIA, they're jealous of us. They're like, I can't believe that you guys had this your whole life and you took it for granted. I mean, that's inspiring. It really is. If you ever get a chance to work with RCIA, just go there once or twice, just to help. If nothing else, to help distribute food. You usually have like snacks. Say, can I bring snacks in time? I just want to see what goes on. I mean, and listen to these people who sometimes, okay, let me say this and then I'll talk about that. These people, by the way, this is only technically for somebody who was never baptized. Was anybody here go through RCIA? I know what other classes. You did? Okay. Technically speaking, this is only for people who were never baptized. All right? If you were baptized, like in any other denomination, by the Trinitarian formula, okay, as long as there was water and the Trinitarian formula, and you want to become Catholic, you are known as a candidate. You never are called a catechumenate, the elect, or any of those things. You're an individual entering the fullness of the faith. Okay? You are an individual entering the fullness of the faith. So if this person was agnostic, atheist, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and wanted to become Catholic, they would go through RCIA. You don't need to know this, but you have to be 7 years or older. Okay? If you're 7 years or younger, you don't go through this process. That's typically the age of reason.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, an individual entering the fullness of the faith. All right? Now, it's likely that the people you know were really candidates who went through RCIA. They tend to tell them to go to classes, but there's no need. The RCIA individuals, the elect, are brought into the faith at Easter Vigil. A candidate can be brought in on a Tuesday, whatever day. I mean, it's entirely up to the pastoral sensitivities of how much do they know they're joining and such, right? Both of these things, though, I mean, again, I can tell you from my limited exposure to RCIA, I never was in charge of anything, but I'd go to give talks. And I was talking once to a woman who was in the catechumenate stage, whose husband was the son of a Pentecostal minister, and the whole family was Pentecostal. I asked her, I said, why are you becoming Catholic? Not that I was trying to discourage her. Why are you becoming Catholic? She said, I started reading history. You know, the old joke is that if you start reading church history, within 2 years you'll be Catholic. Because you're going to realize, oh my God, that looks like the Catholic Church, or the Orthodox, right? She said, I can't help it. I said, how are things going? She's not well. My husband, she came in crying one time. Her husband told her, if you don't get out of this program, I will leave you, and I will get lawyers, and my parents will help me, and I will take the kids. She never did finish, right? So I have no idea what her future plans were or are, but some people make pretty big life decisions here, right? Which again, why they feel so envious of the cradle Catholics who usually take things for granted, okay? These people, have chosen it. Nonetheless, this is only for the non-baptized, okay? They brought it at the Easter Vigil. This is the process, the formation, that's just a little more formal than we see early on. Candidates, on the other hand, can be brought in any time, even though they're typically put into this. This is for people over the age of 7. Okay, under the age of 7, you go to a confirmation class or first communion class. Even if you didn't go to classes, my first communion class, we had a family come in, so there was one friend my age, and then his 2 older brothers. So it looked kind of funny, us all sitting there as little people, and then all of a sudden these 2 tall kids. So they didn't go to classes with us, but they received first communion at the same time, even though they were a little older. All right. So let's talk about baptism of infants now. That's obviously for adults. Baptism of infants, it just follows the church's teaching on original sin and grace. Baptism of infants follows the church's teaching on original sin and grace. We believe there's a loss of original holiness and original justice that needs to be healed. And we also believe that grace is friendship with God, and it's a free gift. So if anybody ever questions you as Catholics, or if you, by the way, I don't care what your particular persuasion is, wherever you go in the world, even if you don't agree with what I'm saying, do at least correct people when they're in error. So if you're in college and some smart aleck professor starts telling you that Catholics, they're the group that believe you have to work your way to heaven, can you just say, then why do they baptize children? You can't be more gratuitous than this for giving salvation to a child who can't even speak, right? Follows the church's teaching on original sin and grace. Now, there are churches out there that do not baptize infants. They might dedicate them, right? But they won't baptize them. They don't believe salvation comes through baptism. First of all, I want to tell you, while you're writing that down, is that no one ever thought that until, this what we call the radical Reformation, the Anabaptists, the Amish, the Mennonites, right? Anabaptism means to baptize again. So you do have groups like evangelicals, non-denominationals, fundamentalists, Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses that do not baptize infants. but that they all come out of that theology. And this is history, and you could fact check anything, right? You're not going to find anybody to agree with that prior to, say, 17th century. Okay? Yes, sir.
I heard this one thing where someone was saying, because someone used to be from that, they turned converted to Catholics, but at first they had like problems with that. They're like, oh, why do you baptize that? It's Jesus was baptized at age 30, and then the priest told him, really, go try to be born from a virgin.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, too, is like, why did we baptize converts in the early church at whatever age they were? What were we going to do? You can't shrink people back down to infancy, okay? So you take people where you are. We still baptize adults, but we baptize children for this. Again, let me reiterate, for the same reason why if you're born into this country, you're a citizen, all right? So if you're going to be a citizen of God, it's the same idea. And by the way, there is no way, that would be like telling a Jew. Can you imagine telling a Jew, why do you bar mitzvah? You know, why do you put this faith on these children when they haven't yet decided for themselves? Well, how are they going to learn it? A Jew would never understand how is in other words, they are in a covenant with God. They want their children in that covenant. They're circumcised. Forget about bar mitzvah. Let's go back to circumcision. They circumcise their children to be brought as a symbol to be brought into the covenant. They're not going to wait until they're older because they want their children in the same covenant that they hold dear. We're doing the same thing. And by the way, I won't get into it, but baptism is what Paul calls the circumcision without flesh. It's a circumcision of heart. So if Jews circumcise infants to bring them into their faith, we baptize children to bring them into our faith. It's not a matter of, remember, it's not the individual's faith, it's the faith of Christ and the church. All right? So why we baptize infants? There's implicit testimony in the Bible. Okay? In the Bible, it says whole households were baptized. Okay, so somebody who's going to argue with that says, well, it says whole households, but it doesn't say children. Okay, so if I'm coming to your house to eat, who's going to be there? My whole family. Do I suppose there'll be no children? Because that's not really part of your family? We don't think like that. But somebody's going to say, it doesn't matter. Okay, we have explicit testimony by the 2nd century. I am talking like 110 AD. We have, and I'll show you, we have testimony of apostolic fathers saying we baptize infants. The apostles told us to do this. So when people say the Bible says nothing about baptizing infants, here's my response. The Bible says nothing about going to church on Sunday. Zip. So if a church says we're a Bible-only church, so I guess you go on Saturday. No, we go on Sunday. Where'd you get that from? Not in the Bible. And if you go to another church and you say, are you Christians? Are you Trinitarian Christians? Yes, we believe in the Trinity. Where did you get that from? Because it's not in the Bible. I mean, if you study any history, the Trinity developed over the first couple hundred years. People argued over this, all right? So if we're going to use the argument, if it's not explicit in the Bible, we don't believe it, then baptism is the least of your worries, all right? You have bigger problems to solve than that. Yes, sir?
Explicit testimony is 12th century.
2nd century. 2nd century. Okay. If a baby dies prior to baptism, we rely on the mercy of God. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If the baby dies before baptism, we rely on the mercy of God. Now, here's our dilemma, a catch-22, if you would like. You cannot have salvation without baptism. But it's not the baby's fault they weren't baptized, or the 4-year-old's fault they weren't baptized. So what kind of God do you believe in that's going to condemn a baby or a 4-year-old to hell because their parents get baptized? That's our dilemma. So we believe in a revealed religion. A revealed religion, again, remember I said it involves reason, but it's not based in reason. We only know what we're told by God. If we have no revelation, then we can't say anything. We speculate. And how we speculate is by saying we can't imagine a benevolent God condemning a child or a baby. We can't imagine that. So our answer can't be yes, because we don't know. But because we can't imagine that, we just say, we rely on God's mercy. We'll rely on God's mercy with the child, and we'll leave it at that. All right?
What about the limbo?
Limbo was never a doctrine. It was just somebody trying to explain, how do you hold necessity of baptism and an innocent person not being baptized? What do you do? Okay? So in Dante's Inferno, the first level of hell is the level of limbo. Who are there? The unborn, the noble pagans, Socrates, Plato, and the other good people. But that is absolute speculation and figurative stuff, all right? We have no revelation. I mean, at some point, we can't say what we don't know. Now, somebody might not like that. Well, but why can't we just say it? Well, because that's not what a revealed religion is. That's what a philosophy is. If Christianity were a philosophy, then we would work it out philosophically and come to a conclusion. But in Revelation, we have what we have, okay? Now, the role of the community. Parents are the primary teachers of the faith. Parents are the primary teachers of the faith. Your parents will be held responsible for your lack of or teaching of the faith. Now, once you're emancipated, you're on your own. You're kind of on your own now, all right? What I'm trying to say is that you can't farm this out to other people. You can't say, well, I send my kid to Catholic school so they learn about the faith if you don't live it at home. I mean, I want you to, let's be frank. If your parents don't go to church and you don't go to church and you're not really into this, do you think I have any power in changing that? Can you imagine if I had that kind of power? I would be in sales. I would not be in this position, all right? So parents are the ones responsible. So I say that to you, not to talk about your own parents, but to talk about you when, God willing, you become a parent. You're the one responsible for your children's faith, and you will be held accountable for that, all right? Godparents help in the formation, okay? Godparents help in the formation. Bless you. They are not the primary ones. They're even a step closer than I would be as a theology teacher. Now, let me say this and then I'll explain it. And godparents must be Catholic. You cannot have a godparent that's not Catholic. Now, I know that you probably have godparents and one of them's not Catholic, all right? They are technically called a sponsor. And I'm going to explain this. Sponsors must be Christian. Okay? So, let's say that you have, your brother is, no, it's old enough. I guess your brother, or let's just say you have a Catholic uncle and he's your godparent. And you wanted his wife to be your godmother. She's Lutheran. So you call them both godparents. But I'm telling you, when the priest writes it down and sends it off to Allentown, he put down your uncle as the godparent and your aunt as the sponsor. Now, that's why you hear rules like one godparent has to be Catholic. That's just the way they talk about it. What they're saying is you need one godparent. Okay? Now, why does that sound exclusionary? Why would you want someone else to be responsible for you in the faith if they don't even hold the faith themselves? That'd be a little weird, wouldn't it? I mean, I don't want a Buddhist being my godparent. They might be the nicest person I've ever met. They're not going to help me in the instruction of my faith. Why must the sponsor at least be Christian? For the same reason. Because this is a Christian religion. Okay? We need to have at least some sort of backing in that realm. So, yes, we talk in the vernacular like, well, I have two godparents, one has to be Catholic. Just so you know, technically speaking, one has to be a sponsor. It's just that the priest is never going to worry about saying that to you because it doesn't matter if you know that. Okay? That being said, the whole ecclesial community is responsible for the formation of the individual. All right? The whole ecclesial community is responsible for the formation of the individual. You're being brought in. This baby is being brought into a community. It's not disconnected from you. So we all have a stake in this person, which is why I too have a stake in your faith formation. Even though I am not primarily responsible for it, I am really, how do I say, not concerned in the bad sense, but I have concern for your formation. Why? Because we're all connected, okay? And let me just share you a real quick little personal story, then I'll move on to the last slide. You know, baptism of infants during a mass, a liturgy, can be quite beautiful. Who doesn't like a baby? I mean, if you don't like a baby, something's wrong, right? So when our priest baptizes the baby, and then I don't know about yours, but ours does the Kunta Kinte moment where he holds the child up to the cross, and everybody's hoping he doesn't drop the kid. You know, my wife and all the other people around her is like, oh, so cute. You know, one of the hazards of being a theologian is I'm looking at it differently. Up until that child being baptized, he was not in Christ's body. The minute that child is baptized, the minute the water hits the child's head and the priest or deacon speaks those words, that child now has the most formidable enemy for the rest of their life. And I know it sounds like, you know, I might be exaggerating, but all Satan, all the demons have one goal: to ruin that child's soul from that moment on. So when he's doing the Kunta Kinte moment, I'm literally praying for angels to protect his child. Because, again, how will this child be pushed off to the side? Remember Harmatea, the arrow? You can only be a little bit off. But if you stay off on that path, you can imagine even a shallow angle, the farther you get down the road, you could be in a distant to the right or to the left, right? That's my fear, is that if this child does not have good formation and good roles in godparents and parents, they're going to be way off on the side. And not only that, they're going to think it's fine, you know? Now, my wife says that's a little gloomy, but I can't get away from thinking of that. I wish I could just look at it and go, oh, I can't, you know? But anyway, that's my hang-up. All right, let's talk now about the necessity of baptism. Who can baptize? Ordinarily, priests and deacons. Ordinarily, only a priest and a deacon can baptize. But, in an emergency, anyone. And I mean anyone. Okay? And I'll explain what that means. In an emergency, anyone. You can be an imam working as a hospital chaplain, and a child is born to a Catholic couple and it is dying, and if the imam says, do you want your child baptized Christian? Yes. That imam, as long as he intends to do what the church wants, he can pour water and say, I baptize in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that child's baptized. All right?
You wouldn't put that on the test, like, there's two options saying priest and deacons, and another option saying anyone.
No, well, look for the word ordinary. If I say, who are the ordinary ministers? It's only a priest and deacon. But that wouldn't be a half bad question. Who's allowed to baptize in any situation? Priests, deacons, and anyone. You know. Renee, do you have your hand up?
Yeah. What if it's like, so like the baby's died, like, what if it's like the parents are there, or whatever? Like, what if they want to do it?
They can do it too. They can do it too. My only point is, it doesn't matter. Okay. I mean, I'm just using an imam as an example, but it could be any situation. It could be, you if, who knows? I mean, if you're hit upon a car wreck, I don't know. I'm not going to make up some scenario. I'm just trying to say that if anybody, as long as you have the disposition of the church, okay? As long as you have the disposition of the church. I wanted to say something, and this is an aside, so you don't need to write this down. You might have heard talk of, there used to be deaconesses, there were women deacons in the early church. Okay, I'm going to show you about immersion. In the early church, they would baptize full immersion, and they would usually just have them wear a white robe. Okay? Now, I'm not trying to be, salacious, but a woman wearing nothing but a white robe in water is going to be revealing. So the men, the priests and deacons, would not go down because that was improper. There's a sense of impropriety. So women would go down with them, and they were known as deaconesses. But they had no other roles. And sometimes people would be baptized naked, all right? So again, for the same sense of impropriety, they would have women accompany the women and men accompany the men, okay? So if you ever hear that out there somewhere, don't think that somehow there used to be female deacons and the church did away with them. You have to understand where that came from, okay? But that's not necessary for you to know. Who can be baptized? every person not already baptized. That's it. If you've never been baptized, you can be baptized. But you can never be baptized twice. This is indelible. No double dipping. All right? Which again is why baptism for us brings salvation. For other people who believe born again is to give yourself a commitment to Christ, they do it 2 or 3 times because they believe it didn't take. We don't have that hang up. For us, it's not the faith of the individual. It's the faith of Christ and his church. Okay? So, what must be done? Okay. If you've been to a baptism in a Catholic church, you have seen the whole rite played out, right? So, there's a little candle. There's oils that they place on the ears and the eyes of the baby. There's other symbols that are very important and very meaningful, but they are not part of what's essential. In an emergency, you only do what's essential. So the only things that are essential are water and the Word, which you already should now know. This is the material and the formal causes. So as long as you say the words, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as you pour water, that person is baptized. And yes, you could do that too. You shouldn't do it unless it's an emergency. I am telling you, it's an old scenario where grandparents who are very devout, their kids don't go to church, they're babysitting their granddaughter, and they bring them over to the sink and baptize them because they want to do that. If they do that, they'll get scolded by the priest. Is the child baptized? Yes. Will we baptize that child again? No. It's baptized. They might do what they call a conditional, have the full ceremony, but even in the full ceremony, they realize the child's already been baptized. Right? Anyway, so water and the Word, the material and the formal. Now, 2 different types, basically, of ways the water is used. A fusion refers to the water being poured on the baby's head. That's typically what we see in our parishes. You know, the father or the mother will hold the baby's head over the water font. The priest or the deacon, as he says, I baptize you, will pour the water over their heads. That's called a fusion. You don't need to know this, but if you ever seen the priest go around and sprinkle, that's called aspersion. We don't need to know that, but that would be good too, okay? Yes?
Why do they pour water over the baby's head?
Well, they pour it because it's a partial sign of the full sign. So let me explain it this way, and then I will answer your question. Immersion, all the way under, that's the fullest sign, okay? So signs, and these are natural signs, right? What is supposed to be this a sign of? Death to life. This child is dead, and now it's being brought into the life of Christ. What symbolizes that? Death underwater, risen coming out of water. Which you can imagine, this would even be fuller if it's done 3 times, the Trinitarian. And it's even fuller when it's done naked, because you bring nothing and you're born with nothing. So these are the fullest signs. Pouring over the head, because the head is something that we hold as an important aspect of the human person, that just becomes a symbol for the whole body. So the water is poured over the head, over the hair usually, but it's obviously a valid sign. We have evidence in early church where they would use running water if they had it, they would use still water if they had it, and if they couldn't even get still water, they would simply pour water or sprinkle water. But if you want to talk about the absolute fullest sign, it's naked 3 times in and out of the water. Okay? And I think I have a video to show you of an Orthodox baptism.
Elizabeth is baptized in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and a girl. You made it.
All right, so it's the fullest sign. It was a little shocking to you, maybe. You probably think they're doing to this kid. What was somebody told me yesterday? What did it say? some priest or some guy in a dress was trying to drown me, all my parents would do is take pictures, something like that, I don't know. Somebody was talking about baptism. But nonetheless, it's the full sign because we're seeing him going from death to life in a Trinitarian way, 3 times, totally naked, all right? But that's the full sign. It doesn't mean the other signs aren't valid. They don't communicate the same thing. All right. Last but not least, baptism is necessary for salvation. This is revelation. The Catholic Church has no other way of guaranteeing salvation for an individual other than baptism. All right? But like I said, that brings up the situation with infants, right? We've already talked about that we rely on God's mercy. But we have other scenarios. What if somebody has just joined the RCIA and they're a pre-catechumen or they're a catechumenate and they die? Or what about, let's say that, you know, you were lived in a country. I have one more note, don't put stuff away. One thing underneath this. Or let's say that you're in another country and because of the witness and evangelization of other Christians, missionaries, let's say that you were considering becoming a Christian, but you never really did anything formally. And then, because it's a country that, you know, does not tolerate Christianity, they start putting people to death, and they come to you. And they say, are you a Christian? You mind saying, this has happened, this is a real life story. I'm not a Christian. But I do believe in the God that they believe in. Well, then you're going to be put to death too, and so be it. Both of those are a type of baptism, all right? Baptism of desire. It was your full intent to be baptized. You were entering, let's say it's March, and you were had full intentions of entering the RCIA program next fall, but you died over summer. What do we say? Too bad for you. Should have stayed alive another 5-6 months. No, that's your desire, right? So some people would use the idea, what happens if your baby dies on the way to baptism? Okay, what were you intending to do? That's baptism of desire. Baptism of blood would be the scenario I told you. If a person was not Christian, yet because of the witness of those around them, they still were willing to die for their faith. And we've had plenty of stories like that. So 3 types of baptism. 2 are implicit, 1's explicit.